EToH.
You read the title. Let's just skip the intro and start this challenge off on day 1. That's right, this isn't clickbait, and this is also me doing my very first frame perfect out of 10,000. Nope, I did 1. I'm sure as I keep going, I'll get used to this, but we'll see how many times I'll get it in a row. Oh, that's 2 times in a row. What? In case you didn't know, this is Amethyst. It's the most recent hardest level to be verified and rated at. Oh, never mind. I guess the second most recently hardest rated level to be. Bro, are you serious? But the first click is actually a 240 FPS frame perfect, which means on 240 FPS, there is only a 1 frame window to pass this click. In other words, you have a 1 in 240th of a second to click to pass this first jump, and I'm going to do that literally 10,000 times. So I just literally copy pasted the first part of Amethyst, slapped a counter on there, and started recording this challenge. I slowly started getting my first couple of frame perfects. The most I've done up to this point though is only 2 in a row. Hopefully by the end of this, I'm going to become an actual god at 240 FPS frame perfects. Maybe I should just go for Amethyst. It's probably by the end of the 10k, I'll just be so good at this first click that I should just go for it, honestly. Okay, did I just do that 3 times in a row? I'm gonna get a much higher number though in the future, so stick around to find out what that number could be. 6, 7. I definitely gotta click later than I think I do, because a lot of these devs are just me clicking too early. I know you're wondering if I'm mentally sane or on the spectrum, because who in their right mind would decide to do a challenge like this? Well, I did a video a while back for my 6,000 subscriber special where I did 6,060 FPS frame perfects, and I said at 24,000 subscribers, I'll do 10,240 FPS frame perfects. But here I am, because I'm a man of my word. The worst part about this is that there's nothing I could use to line up my jump. There's no jump indicator for where to click, which I guess makes sense. This isn't a 2-star, but eventually though, I finally reached my first big milestone of this challenge, 100. Okay, so if it takes me 22 minutes to do 100 frame perfects, and if I crunch my numbers, then in total it should take me somewhere along the lines of 2,000 minutes. Okay, that doesn't sound that bad. So in total, it's... Recording my map will take 2,000 minutes, which is 33 hours. That's a part-time job. I'm gonna be playing Amethyst first click for 33 hours. I gotta clock in to my daily Amethyst 5-hour shift. I'm not being paid doing Amethyst part-time, but someone who will pay me is Cooper. If I can save money online, then I should. And that's where today's sponsor, Cooper, comes in. Cooper is an AI-powered super shopping assistant that automatically saves you money online. That's right, smarter shoppers use Cooper. This extension is awesome. It has automatic coupon testing, which means when you're at checkout, Cooper instantly tests every available coupon for that and try it out.
Albion Online is a sandbox MMORPG in which you write your own story.
Anyways though, it seemed like I was very quickly building consistency because I managed to do 3 frame perfects in a row one more time. I did 3 in a row! Oh my god, I'm goated!
So this is the first click of Amethyst and you've done it 100 times?
Yeah, by my calculations, it should take me 33 hours.
Wait, that's just a wait.
I very quickly realized though that this is going to be an incredibly boring challenge. I'm only 160 frame perfects into this challenge and I'm already starting to feel my brain needing some dopamine in the background. I kept on pushing and made my way to the 200s. Let's go! Only 9,800 left to go. Oh, this is certainly an experience, huh? At the very least, I was entertained a little bit at the start because my girlfriend Michelle was having account issues on TikTok, so I was helping her with that while I was doing my frame perfects.
You weren't able to open it, right? The link?
And look at me go! Doing 4 240 FPS frame perfects in a row. 4 times in a row! I think. I was thinking of ways I could do this challenge of
of the nuclear weapons. Castle Bravo was the strongest detonation, and surprisingly
Call me a good boy.
One day when I was walking home after a long day of work, I saw a dead pigeon on the footpath. However, it wasn't actually dead, it was just high on drugs. And so I decided to take it home to see if I could revive it. I first started by sticking a wooden skewer up its ass and created a makeshift crucifix by shoving another skewer horizontally through its wings. But for some reason it seemed to be in even more pain than before, and so I tried jamming it into a sandwich press and it actually started moving, but then shortly caught fire and sadly passed away. Anyways, apparently humans used to also do this stuff back in the olden days, but instead they did it on other humans. Truly evil human experiments that actually happened by chat history.
Now, you may have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was an unethical medical study funded by the United States Public Health Service in 1932, which involved the study of nearly 400 African American men who had naturally contracted syphilis. The goal was to observe the effects of the disease when left untreated in African American males. Even though penicillin, an antibiotic cure for syphilis, eventually became widely available to the public, the afflicted men were intentionally never cured.
Wait, so they're just gonna let them die? They literally have the cure in front of their face. Why do they need to know the effects of them dying? Isn't it obvious? Like, if you leave it untreated, they're just gonna die. What else are you gonna learn from that? Like, didn't they already establish by this time that syphilis would kill you? So what was the purpose here? Was this like a discreet way of like America to kill black people because they didn't like black people back then? Because this looks like some sort of torture chamber. What is this? This cannot be an ethical experiment over here.
Well, the US decided to outdo themselves with the Guatemalan syphilis experiment. In 1946 to 1948, more than 5,500 Guatemalan natives, including children, were involved in the experiment against their will, with the Guatemalan government granting access to the unwilling patients in hospitals, mental institutions, and even orphanages.
Download the epic online action game War Thunder and brighten your day with thrilling battles. It's not just a game, it's real action, where metal howls, the skies burn, and every shot.
Around 1,300 relatively healthy individuals ages 10 to 72 were intentionally infected with syphilis and even gonorrhea.
Bro, I thought these people already had syphilis and they came to the country to examine them. But instead, the USA are just giving these guys syphilis for no reason at all. They were perfectly fine, bro. They would have lived healthy lives. But instead, you're just gonna not only intentionally give them syphilis, but you're also intentionally not going to treat them and cure them. Like, maybe if you treated them afterwards and reverse the syphilis, that would be borderline okay. But the fact that you're gonna intentionally give them a disease and intentionally let them die from the disease just to prove something, what are they even proving? That is messed up, bro. That is actually messed up.
Transmission was either done by direct bacterial contact into wounds or by transmission with infected native workers, which were funded by the US government, by the way.
Bro, what the frick is this? Bro, it just keeps getting worse. So they just bring some random infected woman with syphilis, and she's probably forced to do the frickety with all these random healthy men, and they have no idea that she has the disease. So is this some way to like speedrun giving everyone the disease? Like maybe they didn't have enough syphilis in like a jar, so they had to just bring this person to infect the entire colony. That is insane.
Which proved to be a very effective method of infection. The guy in charge of these experiments was Dr. John C. Cutler, but you can call him Dr. Dickass. He often failed to keep accurate medical records of his experiments and instead would only provide anecdotal evidence in his findings, probably because he knew what he was doing was unethical, which very much sounds like something only a dickass would do.
Wait, so he's gonna do this $1 million experiment and not even bother to write anything down? And he doesn't want to write stuff down just so that he can't get like, you know, caught up in court like for like this unethical behavior? Because if there's no evidence, there's no documented evidence, then it didn't happen. It didn't happen. But then why is the US government funding this experiment in the first place then?
But all joking aside, the experiments conducted on these people were gruesome. Perhaps one of the most notable documented examples of what these people experienced was about a female patient named Berta. The following is an excerpt from that document. Berta was a female patient in the psychiatric hospital. In February 1948, Berta was injected in her left arm with syphilis. A month later, she developed scabies. Several weeks later, Dr. Cutler noted that she had also developed red bumps where he had injected her arm, lesions on her arms and legs, and her skin was beginning to waste away from her body. Berta was not treated for syphilis until 3 months after her injection. Soon after, on August 23rd, Dr. Cutler wrote that Berta appeared as if she was going to die, but he did not specify why. That same day, he put gonorrheal pus from another male subject into both of Berta's eyes, as well as her private areas. He also reinfected her with syphilis. Several days later, Berta's eyes were filled with pus from the gonorrhea, and she was bleeding from her private area. 3 days later, on August 27th, Berta died.
Bro, what was that doctor doing? Was he trying to speedrun her death? Because as soon as it looks like Berta is about to die, he goes and infects her with gonorrhea as well, and then reinfects her with syphilis the second time. And she had to suffer for 3 months. 3 months before she actually finally died. And what knowledge was gained from this? Like genuinely, what knowledge was gained from this? Like, what is the point of doing this? Because I'm pretty sure at this time in human history, they'd already like observed all the symptoms and everything of syphilis. Were they just trying to see how long it would take for like syphilis to kill someone? Like, I think that's the only explanation. They just wanted to see how fast syphilis would kill someone.
The overall goal of the study was to determine the effectiveness of penicillin in preventing the STDs.
Wait, but then, wait. What? Didn't you just intentionally not use penicillin at all during the study? How can that be remotely related to the intention of the study? Because by the looks of things, it just looked like you guys were just having fun, just killing people with syphilis. How can you be trying to measure the effect of penicillin on syphilis if you intentionally didn't even use penicillin?
Dr. Cutler had allegedly finalized his reports in 1955, but no evidence was ever found proving that the reports were submitted for peer review or even published. So, out of all of that suffering, nothing of medical value was produced. Though, I will say in some glimmer of fairness, a treatment program was established by the United States and made available to the affected Guatemalan population, but only half were reported to actually have received treatments with a questionable quality of care.
And also, the other half of them were probably dead already because they didn't receive treatment to begin with. But yeah, this is messed up. This is actually messed up. The USA, intentionally infected these random people with syphilis and chose not to treat them. They need some help. This is messed up. How could they think of this?
Чуваш Криспи навсякъде? Послушай желанието си. Киндер Криспи – хрупкава вафла с пълнеж от млечен и какаов крем и млечен шоколад с бисквитени трохи. Новият Киндер Криспи звучи добре, на вкус е страхотно.
Търсите начин да се отървете от хремата? Специалистите по хрема и ксилогел представят първия гел спрей в действие. Ксилогел не изтича от носа и не се стича в гърлото. Ксилогел действа дълго, защото остава в носа и възстановява нормалното дишане.
Ксилогел е лекарствен продукт без лекарско предписание. Ксилогел 0,05% за деца над 3 години. Ксилогел 0,1% за възрастни и деца над 12 години. Преди употреба прочетете листовката.
Ксилогел. Хремата си отива с гел.
Project 4.1 was actually a side project proposed immediately after the deployment of Castle Bravo, a high-yield thermonuclear bomb that was dropped in 1954 by the United States. Bravo was part of Operation Castle, a series of other high-yield nuclear tests with the goal of establishing superiority over the Soviet Union. The Marshall Islands, a remote Pacific group of islands, served as ground zero for the detonation of the nuclear weapons. Castle Bravo was the strongest detonation and surprisingly produced 2.5 times the expected explosive yield, resulting in an explosive force equivalent to 15 megatons of TNT.
Damn, that would at least do a little bit of damage. But what happens here? Your experiment produces twice the amount of expected explosive power. Doesn't that just like kill everyone? Like what is the buffer? Like how far away would you stand? Like I swear that would kill everyone, no?
To put that into perspective, that is 1,000 times the explosive force of the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan in the final days of World War II.
Wait, but then how didn't the entire country explode then? 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima? Wouldn't the entire country explode from this bomb then?
To make matters worse, the Marshall Islands were occupied with citizens. So US officials were kind of like, sir, shouldn't we get those people out of the...
Bless you.
Thanks, sir. Allergies have been bothering me all day. Must be the radiation, right? No, but seriously, are we going to get those people out of the radiation zone?
Yeah, you know, that was on my to-do list. Well, too late now, so let's just see how things turn out.
But then wouldn't this count as like genocide? Technically, you're killing off an entire like island, like people just living there, like a nation. Because if you think about it, isn't this low-key an Austrian painter type beat? Like this is what the Austrian painter may have done if like this stuff was invented back then, I think.
Operation Castle was quickly amended with the addition of Project 4.1. This new section aimed to study the human response to significant radiation exposure. You know, as if tens of thousands of victims in Hiroshima and Nagasaki weren't evidence enough.
Wait, so they just decide to remix this into a 2-in-1 combo experiment? Instead of getting the inhabitants off the island, they just want to use them as case studies to study the effect of radiation onto them? Isn't this extremely unethical and very avoidable? But I guess they're just being resourceful. They're just using every single opportunity to create some random experiments. Every new experiment will create another experiment. And then I assume the next experiment will be like to see what their kids turn out like if they all end up mutated and everything. So that will be the experiment from the experiment from the experiments.
Commander of the U.S. Naval Medical Corps, Eugene Cronkite, was in charge of the project and swore everyone involved to absolute secrecy because he thought the public wouldn't be too keen on the whole test nuclear radiation on non-consenting people thing.
I mean, I think this is a good hunch. I think he has a good hunch here that most people would not be okay with this. This seems very, very unethical.
Overall, 239 Marshallese residents were exposed to significant levels of radiation and began showing signs of radiation poisoning a few days later. Symptoms included loss of hair and significant skin damage with weeping wounds, although the wounds did heal rather quickly. Immediate observations ceased after 75 days with the conclusion that no long-term effects were likely. But just out of curiosity, regular checkups were performed on the residents for years after. Women saw increases in miscarriages and stillbirths, and newborns that survived experienced developmental difficulties, impaired growth, and a disproportionate development of thyroid cancer.
So this is the experiment from the experiment from the experiment. So it's a 3-in-1 combo experiment. Of course, this is going to happen to the kids.
In addition, about 1/3 of those exposed had developed significant tumors by 1974, 20 years after Operation Castle commenced.
But remember, bro, 75 days after all the side effects have gone. It's 75 days, nothing wrong after 75 days. It's only 75 days. But then, of course, 20 years later, bro, of course, 20 years later, you're going to have issues.
In the following years, Marshallese representatives spoke out against the United States with accusations that the scope of the experiment was premeditated and intentional, to which the U.S. officials responded, nuh-uh.
I mean, at that point, there's really no way to sort of defend yourself in this situation. Of course, bro, of course it was intentional. Why do you think they created that secondary experiment if it wasn't intentional?
During the early years of the Soviet Union, it wouldn't be uncommon for political opponents to quickly fall ill with a strong case of the death at the hands of poison.
No, it's not poison. It's not poison. It was just natural causes. They died from natural causes. Nothing suspicious here.
In fact, it was quite an effective and discreet way to silence any and all opposition without causing too much of a stir.
Стресът може да причини косопат.
Точно така. Стресът е признат като една от основните причини за косопат. Но с правилна грижа и ефективен серум, косата може да порасне по-силна и по-гъста.
Ново Елсев Growth Booster. L'Oréal, Париж.
Well, besides the public reacting to mysterious deaths. And that is why we must rise up against... Oh, look at that. They got another one. So how were the Soviets so good at developing successful poisons? Well, you've got to run preliminary trials on living subjects, of course. So in 1921, a year before the Soviet Union officially formed, the Kamera was established. This was the Soviet Secret Service's poison laboratory. Here, new deadly poisons were developed and tested on human subjects.
Bro, are you sure this was the Soviet Union or was this some sort of clan? This suspiciously looks like a different clan out there.
Those tested were prisoners from the gulags, various labor camps built around the country for anyone who even had a fleeting thought that wasn't approved by the Soviet Union.
Wait, so they turned the Call of Duty gulag into a real thing in Russia? If you win the gulag, can you respawn? But then in this case, they're going to the gulag to poison the gulag prisoners. But then when they die from the poison, I assume they get to go into the gulag again to 1v1 someone else to get rebooted? That is confusing. That is a paradox. Isn't that a paradox? Because then if they're in the gulag to 1v1, then they'll get poisoned again. But then they'll die and go back to the gulag to 1v1, and then it's just a paradox.
The ultimate goal of the Kamera was to devise a poison that was not only lethal, but undetectable. It would be colorless, tasteless, odorless, and untraceable in an autopsy.
Also known as my homemade special sauce. So I assume what happens here is that they just go a nut in a jar and just pour some into people's water glasses. Because my nut is colorless, sometimes tasteless most of the time. Sometimes it's odorless and it is fineless. Yeah, you can't really trace it.
Prisoners would be unknowingly administered various test poisons, which were disguised as medication. For me, if it isn't an orange Flintstone vitamin, I don't trust it. The various poisons tested included ricin, which causes severe internal distress and suffering, cyanide, which can cause violent seizures and heart attacks, and curare, a potent muscle relaxant that makes you painfully choke to death.
Damn, so not only did they turn the gulag into a real thing, but they also turned Ferrari into like a poison? Ferrari. They turned the Ferrari car into a poison.
In the end, the tests were pretty successful. For the Soviet Union, not for the prisoners. Research led to innovative ways to discreetly dispatch a target, from deploying a cyanide mist to making an assassination look like a heart attack. But the blue ribbon winner was the concoction known as C2, carbolamine choline chloride, which was basically liquid depression. Exposure to this sucker sparked a very curious reaction. Instead of a violent telltale "I've been poisoned" type death, the victim would simply become weak with a rapid decline in health, all while maintaining a calm and silent demeanor. Death occurred within 15 minutes. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russian officials have claimed that the Kamera has been disestablished and abandoned.
Okay, I guarantee 100%, 100 million%, it has not been abandoned. It has been disassembled and abandoned. Yeah, bro. I guarantee if you check on Google Maps, you can probably still find it. People on Reddit have found it already. It is still in operation. Like, people on Reddit find these random things in Russia. But yeah, honestly, I think this is slightly questionable. I feel bad for the Gulag prisoners. I was gonna rank this as EToH, but then I remembered that, they can just, go back into the Gulag, win their 1v1, and then, reboot, right?
Yeah, that last one was quite the doozy, huh? Well, buckle up because it's about to get way worse. See this right here? This is Unit 731. It was home to some of the most notorious and truly evil war crimes committed by the Japanese in World War II, which are definitely up there with some of the worst in the history of mankind. Unit 731 served as a lethal human experimentation and biological weapons laboratory during the Second Sino-Japanese War between China and Japan.
Okay, I've heard that Japanese war crimes are really, really messed up, but I've never actually known any of the specifics about what they did. But all I know is that my grandpa, who was Chinese, he would always refuse to eat Japanese food because of what happened during the war. He would never eat Japanese food, didn't want anything to do with Japan, and so I assume what they did to the Chinese people is probably a little bit bad.
This nightmare facility was established in 1935 in the subprovincial Chinese city of Harbin, 4 years after Japanese forces invaded the Chinese region of Manchuria. Inside, hundreds of thousands of Chinese and even some Russian prisoners of war were subjected to some of the most egregious and horrifying human experimentations known to man. Experiments performed on men, women, and children, which is everyone. Those chosen for experimentation were dehumanized and referred to as maruta, or logs, rather than as people, because the cover-up story for Unit 731 was that it was a lumber mill.
Bro, a lumber mill? Out of all cover-ups you could have gone for, a lumber mill instead of a torture chamber. A lumber mill. You could have just said it was like a research lab or like something more believable. A lumber mill? This sort of looks like Squid Game when they like put everyone in the coffins and everything.
It should be noted that the vast majority of the experiments in the facility were carried out to fulfill morbid curiosity, with those performing or overseeing the studies described as merely playing. A testimony from a Japanese professor who witnessed the studies was quoted saying that some of the experiments had nothing to do with advancing the capability of germ warfare or of medicine. There is such a thing as professional curiosity. What would happen if we did such and such? What medical purpose was served by performing?